Welcome to Rock Our World. That's the event of Daniel 2 when the great rock, Yeshua, known as Jesus Christ to many believers, and known as Yahweh to the Jewish people, comes out of outer space and strikes the beast power, the 10 toes, the 10 nations. What we're looking at right now is UN and the New World Order, strikes that on the feet and destroys it. That assemblage of nations, of powers by men's thinking, led by Satan the devil. This is episode 93, and I'm going to entitle it The Tribulation Saints, the Second Army. And that's from Rick Joyner's vision. Hopefully you've gotten a hold of that. So I'm going to begin by quoting Revelation 14:6, and this is kind of where I left off 2 episodes back in the flow of Revelation. And I've been saying this takes the majority of the whole 50 years of the tribulation. So I'll read it. This is Revelation 14:6, and I saw another messenger flying in heaven, and with blood he had the everlasting good news to proclaim to dwellers on the earth and to every nation and tribe and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, "Worship Elohim," that is God, "and give glory to him, because the hour of his judgment is come, and adore you him, who made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of water." I'm quoting from the Aramaic English New Testament that I've recommended. Not a great translation, but the only accurate one we have, the only one taken from the original Aramaic. And if you'll notice that there was this phrase in there that is there and taken out of all the other Greek translations, "and with blood." What that's saying is there's these saints, saints of the Second Army, are going to give up their lives in the process of what they are called to do. They are, for the most part, made martyrs during this difficult period of the tribulation. But the point I'm making is the majority of this 50 years is used to proclaim the gospel to the entire world. And I'm going to take you to Mark 13:10, that says much the same thing. It seems a little bit out of place in the flow of things, but we have been taught and tend to think differently than what God is actually planning. And in Mark 13:10, it says, "And then the gospel will be preached to all the world." And I want to point out also that in the 3, well, we call them gospels, that they're the good newses and the hopes. That's what the Aramaic word means, good news and hope. And in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, when you find this section on where Yeshua is answering the question, how do the last days unfold, it makes the statement, "And the angels will be sent out to gather the elect from the 4 corners of the earth." We tend to think in our human minds that that's an event, and it happens in a flash of a moment. But this is a 50-year process. It's a few words describing a 50-year process. Now, I want to take you, this is a little bit different off the topic, but I noticed this when I was researching this, and it's an encouragement. Luke 21:34. I'm just going to quote it from, I think this is an NIV. "Be careful or your hearts will be weighed down with dissipation, which means extravagance, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life. And that day, which is always a reference to the last days, will close on you unexpectedly like a trap, or like a thief in the night, as Yeshua used that term a number of times. For it will come upon all those who live on the face of the whole earth. Be always on the watch, and pray that you may be able to escape all that is about to happen, and that you will be able to stand before the Son of Man. So this, again, is an encouragement to all believers that they can be among those who escape all these things. And I have attempted to describe to you how that can come about. And of course, I have to listen to my own words. We all have to be diligent and not be caught up in the cares of everyday life. The cares of everyday life have to be taken care of, but they can easily overtake the more important things of our relationship with our Lord. We have to invest that time in that to pray, to contemplate the things of the Lord, to do our fasting periodically, regularly, more than the once a year that is commanded in the Torah on the Day of Atonement. All the things, and meditation, that's another one. And that's sort of like, I call meditation is when you're praying while you're doing other things during the day, or sitting. I sometimes go up on the roof of my house, especially in the fall, and look at all the beauty of the trees around us. Our yard is filled, our entire farm is filled with trees. We have about 100,000 trees planted on our farm that myself, my wife, and our 4 children and friends helped plant. The majority of them back in 1989. But when the fall colors come, when they begin to turn in the fall, there's a tremendous amount of beauty surrounding me. And I like going up on the roof of my house and sitting in a chair, especially on a calm day in fall, and watching the progression over 2-3 weeks of the changing colors of the trees. So I'm now going to, I brought up the appointed times in my last episode. I'm just going to do a quick review of those for those who have kind of tuned in the last few series of going through Revelation especially, and have not had a chance to go back in episodes. I talked about the Sabbath day being the 19th, and then the 20th. Today is the first day of the new moon, and there's some expectation we'll have 3 days of the new moon for the first time ever. Who knows? Anyway, I mentioned that Genesis 1:14 says that the Lord put the sun and the moon in the sky to tell us and give us signs for his appointed times. What I want to add to that is that you would want to start with a project to research the word 4150 in your Strong's Concordance. You'll find it used 200 times. 100 of those are simply a description of the tabernacle in the wilderness, which proper name would be the tent of the appointed times. That's where we meet with the Lord on his appointed times. Back in the wilderness, that was the temple. And the same goes on for all the temples that were built since, and then there's one being built. I would speculate as we speak, there's one being built in the city of David. And again, that is the place where the Lord meets with his people on his appointed times. And then we go to Ezekiel 45:17, and we find that the appointed times include the Sabbath day, the New Moon Festival, and the 7 yearly festivals. And many, many Christians are not familiar with those 7 yearly festivals. They are the Passover, the days of unleavened bread, the Feast of First Fruits, the Feast of Weeks, which was misnamed Pentecost by the Greek translators. Then in the fall we have the Feast of Trumpets, the Day of Atonement, and the final feast, the Great Celebration. The greatest of them all is the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths, or Temporary Dwellings. So that is a quick overview of what the appointed times are, what I was referring to as the Sabbath day and the New Moon Festival and the upcoming fall feasts. Now, the subject today is the Tribulation Saints, or the Second Army, from Rick Joyner's vision. And I'm going to take you to two scriptures and read them to you. Revelation, actually I'm going to start in Daniel 7:25. I got so many Bibles here. Hopefully I keep track of everything. He will speak words against the Most High and will harass the holy ones of the Most High. He will think of changing times and laws, and they will be delivered into his power for a time, times, and half a time. Now this is speaking of the second beast, the false prophet, who is given the authority by the Lord to have power over the holy people. And then we'll go to Revelation 13:5-7 and read the same thing that's happening as Revelation describes it. The revelation to John is talking about the same thing, the same period of time. And that is Revelation 13:5-7. Then the beast was allowed to speak great blasphemies against God, and he was given authority to do what he wanted for 42 months. That would be this 3.5-year period again. And he spoke terrible words of blasphemy against God, slandering his name and all who live in heaven, who are his temple. And the beast was allowed to wage war against God's holy people and to overcome them. And he was given authority to rule over every tribe and people and language and nation. Now this period of time is in the midst of the tribulation, and one of the questions would be, why does God allow this, and who are these tribulation saints? And what I'm going to describe here is that there's a difference between them, the Second Army, and this group called the First Army, and I've pointed out that that is the bride. And we see the bride, if we back up a little bit, actually we see them in chapter 14:1, and if we back up, we find them in Revelation 7:1-8, and then 9 and 10 talks about the Tribulation Saints, the Second Army. Anyway, what I'm going to try and do is go through another description. I've tackled this in many different ways in other episodes, but that the Lord has a specific way to bring about salvation to the billions. And he does it by, first of all, raising up his bride, and we all have the opportunity to be amongst these. But we need to be moving on it right now. We can't be waiting and putting it off till later. The bride is going to be the leaders during this 50-year period. They will be the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers that God has set aside and trained and approved of. They will be the ones performing the amazing miracles, healing them, especially the healing of radiation sickness, people that are going to be dead because of all the radiation They'll be miraculously healed. People will be raised from the dead. There'll be all kinds of amazing things going on. And that will be performed for the most part by these this 144,000, the bride of Christ, and they will be the leaders and teachers of the second army. They'll be helping them along. And of course, people that are asleep in the third army, they also have the opportunity during this 50 years that they can move into the positions of these first two armies if they choose, if they allow their hearts to be softened, and there'll be a lot of things going on in these 50 years. But this greatest group that dies as martyrs is the second army, and their whole purpose is to inspire all the other people watching in the world. As this gospel is preached to the whole world, they watch these people die that are willing to give up their lives instead of confessing that the beast power is God, or switching sides. They stick to their testimony that their Lord is Jesus, is Yeshua. I imagine during the tribulation we will switch our terminology to correct some of these things as it goes along. And there'll just be so many things going on here, it's hard to describe, and of course I'm just getting a glimpse of it. But I'm attempting to point out that this group of tribulation saints, the second army, are millions upon millions upon millions of people, perhaps even approaching the billion mark. And the purpose in them dying is to bring about even more conversions and bringing them into the family of God during this tribulation, where a sum total of several billion people will enter the kingdom of God. And they will have great rewards because they have chosen to do it the hard way. We could put it that way. The easy way is to be a coward and to, even though you know better, give in to this beast power and follow what against your heart, because it's easy and you're faced with death. You'll be given your life if you confess your allegiance to this evil entity, this beast power, and the false prophet, and the false church, and all these things that are being put together and unfolding during the tribulation. That's the easy route. Now, I do want to add, and I've done this a number of times, that myself, I don't believe that the people that make this wrong choice end up in hell. They are deceived, and that wouldn't be fair to condemn you to eternal death or hell, whatever that looks like, because you're deceived. All these people will have a chance at the end of the 1,000 years when they're raised up in the second resurrection. And I'm going to go through that in a future episode. And I again want to say my prime objective in all of this is to give hope to people, because we are going to go through, in the next 3.5 years, is my expectation, we'll go through the most traumatic part of time in all of history that ever was or ever will be. And we're going to need hope to get through that. So that's my objective, is to bring hope and to put that hope in your hearts. And even though there's just a little bit of time left, if our timeline is correct, there is still time for you to rev up your spiritual life. So on that note, I will say, see you next time. This is Rock Our World.